Do you see a difference between people in a corporate setting being not ready and founders not being ready? And how do you see the difference? You must have studied a lot of people, and some of them want to be entrepreneurs. They become founders, and from what I can see in your reports and the studies that you seem to have done, the founders may not be ready to be a founder, right? And you also provide this as an insight to investors. So do you see a difference between corporate executives or leaders not being ready and founders not being ready? How do you see the components or the elements different from both of them?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I don't have, you know, I don't have a lot of quantitative data around this yet. We are doing a lot of work to evaluate some of the trends in leaders and some of the outcomes. Like, for example, we're looking at a body of work, publicly available data, looking at Y Combinator and Techstars founders and founding teams to determine their developmental capacity and some of the outcomes they've seen, whether it's follow-on funding or an exit. So we are looking deeply into this. But what I would say from my own experience and then diving into this space is that it's having a lower level of development doesn't necessarily mean that that you're not competent or that you're not capable. It just means that you might not be ready for a specific role. So I would say that just starting with the startup founders, I think a lot of people have a misconception of what being a startup founder is, anywhere from like being disgruntled with corporate America or, corporate, not just corporate America, but just being disgruntled working for other people, to having a personality that is very focused on achievement and outcomes, and then a lot of risk aversion.
Mm.
So I think those elements are important, but not sufficient all the time. Certainly, we see outliers of people who have they almost seem like they're on the edge of burnout all the time. But typically, there's a number of things you need in order to be successful as a startup founder. And this is what we did dig into the data before creating our assessment tool. We looked at 300 research studies and picked out these 6 constructs because they showed positive correlations with startup outcomes. So I think one of the main things is coachability.
Mhm.
So someone's ability to take in strategic feedback. If they're not able to do that consistently, or they get defensive too soon, it's very difficult to iterate on a product or the business model. So if you go in with an idea and you're not really listening to the external market about the actual idea itself, it's more likely that you're probably not going to make it as a startup founder. So I think when people go in and they're stubborn and they're like, oh, this has got to exist, and they don't do customer discovery and they don't understand, what's actually the reality of what people want or need, then I think those are some conflating factors. And then in corporate America, I would say, so coachability and the ability to pivot quickly, while holding the goal in mind. So I think you have to be able to pivot as a startup founder, and that's related to coachability. So you want to make sure that when new information comes in, you can say, hey, this isn't working. Let's move over here, but we're still focused on this goal. And then the last piece, while there are others, I think the last piece on the startup founder side that I think is really interesting is this strategic complexity. So being a startup founder, you kind of have to play all these different, especially in the 0 to 1 phase, you're playing a lot of different roles at once. And so especially now with AI, while it augments and can enhance your ability to do work, you still have to have a lot of critical thinking to know how to take the information and do something meaningful with it. So holding a bunch of different concepts in place at once objectively is a very important ability. And so that's why we test for that. I hate the word test, but that's why we measure for that. And then I think on the corporate side, You do see people, I think in general, in innovation roles, I think that you tend to see a little bit more crossover with startup founders. But I think that in the corporate settings, there's a little bit less maybe risk tolerance.
Mm.
People want to be a little, more comfortable in their roles, and you don't have to necessarily take on so much risk yourself. I think the risk is more distributed. And so, and I would say the ability to pivot quickly is while important, it's probably less important, because depending on the size of your company, you might
Yeah.
not need to. So those are some of the things we see differences in, I would say. But again, I think what we're trying to articulate is know yourself a bit more before you choose a role, and know what that role is going to take in terms of some of these factors, and make that part of the decision making process, instead of just looking at the job function and saying, that sounds good, but am I really ready for that? Am I really ready? So.